You know, in a couple of weeks will be the anniversary of 9/11. And I'm reminded about how we all mourn in different ways. Many of us, we go to places of worship, we go out into our beautiful green spaces, most of us nest, holding together ever more tightly our friends and family. In the weeks following 9/11, New Yorkers, they flocked to their art museums, specifically the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Why? The answer gets to the heart of why art museums matter, why we care, and how they have become pillars of strength and inspiration in our communities. So first, we're going to need to do a little bit of Art Museums 101, but this is not going to be painful because we're going to do the Cliff Notes version. And we're going to start in the 16th century in Europe when the idea developed about museums. And we're starting in 16th century Europe in what we call Wunderkammern, or wonder rooms, or cabinets of curiosities. And I'm showing examples from the 17th and the 18th centuries. And you can tell that these are remarkable spaces that combine art and science, mingling together specimens of natural history as well as artificial curiosities, and that's the name that we give to art objects that are made by humans. Now, initially, these wonder rooms were put together by royalty, and they were meant to spark curiosity, and they were meant to build foundations of knowledge, but they could also be expressions of princely power and thus a form of propaganda. Now, let's jump ahead to 1789 and the storming of the Bastille in Paris. Now, I know that this is not that famous prison. This is the Apollo Room. And it was built by the best architects, artists, designers working in France to glorify King Louis XIV. The French revolutionaries, they didn't tear it down. They didn't graffiti over it. They didn't cover it up. They did something much more powerful. They changed its meaning. If you go to the Louvre Museum in Paris today, and you go to the Apollo Room, you're going to see the entablature over it that you see on the left. And basically what it's saying is that what was once the property of the king, intended to glorify him, was now the property of the French people, meant to glorify them. And so nationalism and cultural pride is bound up and in the DNA of the Louvre Museum. Now, this is the Cliff Notes version, so we're jumping ahead to 1851 London with another model of the public art museum, the Louvre being the world's first public art museum. And this next model is called the Victoria and Albert Museum. We call it the V&A for short. And its immediate predecessor was this, the Great Exhibition of 1851, also called Crystal Palace. And this exhibition was meant to bring together the greatest in international design. And like the Louvre, democracy or a democratic spirit was certainly behind it, but it was twinned with commercial interests, the idea of stimulating and nurturing excellence in British design, in bringing together people from all over the world to stoke international trade and international relations and tourism. And it was free. It was free to all people, the V&A. If the Louvre is about national identity and cultural power, the V&A is about all of that, but also making. Because what the V&A does is it brings together art from all over the world, including copies of great works of art, including Michelangelo's David, although in this version it comes with a detachable fig leaf that curators would quickly cover up the naughty bits whenever Queen Victoria was coming to pay a visit. But it was meant to nurture this idea of excellence in British design. And whereas in the Louvre, it's organized along the principles of national schools. So you have Italian art, French art, Dutch art, Flemish art. At the V&A, it's organized by medium. So painting, prints, photographs, glass, ceramics, textiles, clothing, so that they're emphasizing what is made and how it is made and what it looks like. Now, I hope you're wondering by now, where is Memphis in all of this? Well, at the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art, where I work, It's a combination, as it is in many art museums across the United States, of the two models that I just described to you, the Louvre model and the V&A model. And we turned 100 years ago, I think Jeff referred to that, in May of 2016, and I was absolutely delighted to read the birthday card a few days after our big party. Because what art museums do, and what they were intended to do, both at the Louvre and the V&A, they come from a democratic, progressive impulse. They are meant to elevate, to refine, to cultivate, to educate, and they are meant to bind together a community. That's what museums do. And I love this. I don't know who wrote it, but it says, Brooks has brought Memphis together. A lot of people, they think that art museums are an embellishment, a garnish, a cherry on top of a sundae. But there's so much more than that. Think about it. Art museums are critical to a city's infrastructure. Can you think of one major city without a major art museum? Art museums bring together art and people across different time periods and different cultures. And I think that that is what people were looking for in the weeks following 9/11. But to get back to Memphis, Brooks has brought Memphis together. It stumbled in its beginnings, and it began in the 1900s because Memphis has cultural ambitions, and it emerged in the 1900s after not one, but 3 yellow fever epidemics. And it was the brainchild of Mrs. E.A. Neely, working with the Swiss-American artist Carl Gutierrez. They germinated this idea of creating an art museum in our beloved Overton Park. And they had children. Children were gathering together, raising money for this building by collecting recyclables, collecting paper, rags, and rubber. And so in the origin story of our museum, the city's museum, the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art, are 4 things: patron, artist, children, and grassroots efforts. Although those efforts stumbled a bit in the beginning until Bessie Vance Brooks, seen here in this splendid portrait by Cecilia Bowe, gave $100,000 to the city of Memphis to create its first art museum. And this is the equivalent of about $2 million today. And they hired one of the country's very best architects, James Gamble Rogers, to build the building. And here it is, sitting in 1916 in the heart of Overton Park. And when we opened in May of 1916, I just love this part. There was no art collection, and there was no staff to support it. But that's so Memphis, right? And so soon... But soon it grew, and it grew, and it grew, and there is so much life in the Memphis Brooks Museum of Art. And it also, and this is important for you to know as a Memphian, is that we are the oldest art museum in the state of Tennessee. We're the largest art museum in the state of Tennessee, and we are the only art museum in the state of Tennessee in the region to have art that comes from all around the world. And that's so important when we think of Memphis, a raucous river town that connects to the world historically through its waterways and now through its entrepreneurial businesses, and of course, its music, our calling card to the world. The world is rooted in Memphis and Memphis in the world, and the world is rooted in the Memphis Brooks, where you have 5,000 years of art made from 5,000 years ago to today and across all cultures, so that they sort of bump up against one another, different cultures and time periods. And that's what New Yorkers, I think, were looking for, because art connects people to different places and different time periods in a public space of undescribable beauty. We all know that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. We know that beauty changes and concepts of beauty. They change across different cultures and across time, and you can see it here. Concepts of women's beauty and power expressed in a 16th century Nigerian mask and a 15th century portrait of a woman. Or at the Memphis Brooks, where I work, the quilt, the pattern, the shape and form of a quilt that's made in Gee's Bend, Alabama, and it looks very similar, but its meaning is quite different from the form, shape, and color of Joseph Alber's Homage to the Square. The former about family, about passing on knowledge from groups of women to their daughters, about limited resources, and about the universal need for warmth and protection. And then the other one, this kind of relentlessly scientific investigation of color and form. So we know that beauty resides in certain kinds of objects, certain kinds as in varied and different from one another. But we also know that there is certainty in the idea of beauty itself. That no matter what happens, humans will make beautiful, amazing, authentic objects. Now, I want to end with a story. And I was working at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston in 2004, and one day at work I got a phone call from a member of a sorority, and she had been helping Hurricane Katrina evacuees out of New Orleans temporarily relocate in Houston, and she wanted to bring by one of these refugees to the museum. And at the time, we had an installation of artworks by African American artists from the permanent collection on view. And we also had works of art that dealt with the theme of civil rights on view. And of course, this is an image that you know well by Memphian Ernest C. Withers of the 1968 Memphis sanitation workers' strike of 1968. But completely by coincidence and on loan temporarily was this painting from the Norman Rockwell Museum. I know we think of him as an illustrator, but this was the original painting, and it's about 3 by 5 feet. And it's called The Problem We All Live With. It's dated 1963. It was published in Look magazine in 1964 and based on an event that happened in New Orleans in 1960. And the way Rockwell has framed this is it's really from the point of view of the child. And the child is Ruby Bridges, and she's walking to school. And flanked in front of her and behind her are U.S. Marshals, white, so large, so towering, we don't even see their heads. And in the background, you see a tomato splattered against the wall. It's dripping juice, clearly reminiscent of blood. This is a powerful condemnation of racism. The problem we all live with, as the title says. And so we were waiting in the gallery for our visitor to arrive, and she turned the corner and she saw the painting. And I rushed over to help support her because it looked like her knees were buckling. It was Ruby Bridges' mother, Lucille Bridges. She was a Hurricane Katrina evacuee. She's the one who in 1960 stood up and who sent her daughter to a formerly white public school. And she immediately said once she recovered that she had never seen the real thing, the real painting before. She knew it only from a print that the artist had signed and given to her as a gift. But the real thing, the painting 3 by 5 feet, had a kind of immediacy and visceral quality that the print lacked. She was stunned. And then the U.S. Marshals came. They heard that the painting was on loan at the museum. They read in the papers that Mrs. Bridges was in Houston, and they wanted to hold a meeting in front of the painting. They wanted to bear witness, and so they did. After all, as one of them said to me, a print of this painting is in U.S. Marshal offices all over the country. And then, completely out of the blue, a man raised his hand and said that he had been judicial clerk to Judge Skelly Wright, the Fifth Circuit judge who had executed the order to desegregate public schools in New Orleans in 1960, and that this man had helped to draft. It was an amazing gathering of witnesses to history, 40 years after Ruby Bridges walked to William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans, as we were all grappling with the aftermath of Katrina, the levee breach, and the devastation all along the Gulf Coast. So art, public space, and the people to activate and animate it and give it meaning. That is life in an art museum. Thank you.